London, 1814. Marriage, Lady Olivia Danbury observed to her reflection, is but a transaction. And I, it seems, am the commodity. She sat at her vanity, trying to arrange her features into something resembling composure as her lady's maid finished with her hair. The elegant chignon would have to do, despite Olivia's conviction that no hairstyle could possibly make the evening ahead tolerable. The letter on her dressing table, delivered that morning on the finest cream stationery, sealed her fate more effectively than any prison sentence. Written in her father's decisive hand, it stated without room for negotiation that she was to be presented to the Duke of Moreland at tonight's ball, with the understanding that their match was all but arranged. "Miss, you look beautiful," her maid offered. Olivia managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Jenkins. Though I doubt the Duke of Moreland will notice, as long as my father's bank accounts are in order." The maid clucked sympathetically. At 25, Lady Olivia had navigated 7 London seasons with the keen intelligence and sharp wit that had made her simultaneously admired and unmarriageable. She had refused 3 offers, scandalized the ton by expressing opinions on politics, and been branded too clever by half by society matrons desperate to see their sons settled with more biddable young ladies. But her father's investments in the West Indies had suffered catastrophic losses. Their grand townhouse and country estate now teetered on the precipice of foreclosure, with creditors growing increasingly impatient. The solution, as Lord Danbury had plainly informed his daughter, was simple. She would marry Frederick Moreland, the Duke of Moreland, a man she had never met but whose coffers were reportedly as vast as his estates. "The Duke requires a wife of good breeding," her father had explained, not unkindly. "And we require his fortune. A fair exchange, wouldn't you say?" Olivia had wanted to argue that selling one's daughter hardly constituted a fair exchange, but the dark circles beneath her father's eyes and the tremor in his hands had stilled her tongue. For the first time in her life, clever words would not solve their predicament. Only a wedding ring would. "The carriage is waiting, Miss," Jenkins announced, offering Olivia her evening gloves. As Olivia descended the stairs, her father waited in the foyer, his shoulders straight despite the burden he carried. "You look lovely, my dear," he said, genuine affection warming his voice. "The Duke will be most impressed." "I should hope he appreciates what he's purchasing," she replied, immediately regretting her words when she saw her father wince. "Olivia," he began, "I never wished, I know, Papa." She squeezed his arm gently. "I understand the necessity. But please don't expect me to pretend this is anything but what it is, a business arrangement." The Huntington ballroom blazed with hundreds of candles, their light glinting off the jewels of London's elite. Olivia moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting the compliments and curiosities of acquaintances while her eye scanned for her intended. "Which one is he?" she whispered to her father. "I'm not entirely certain," Lord Danbury admitted. "I've only seen his portrait, and that was painted some years ago." Lady Winthrop promised an introduction. Olivia suppressed a sigh. "How reassuring to know I shall be marrying a complete stranger." Their hostess, Lady Winthrop, bustled over, her face alight with the pleasure of one about to facilitate an advantageous match. "Lord Danbury. Lady Olivia. What a delight. His Grace has just arrived, and I have promised him the first introduction." She gestured toward a tall figure conversing with an elderly gentleman near the refreshment table, his back to them. "Shall we?" Lady Winthrop didn't wait for an answer before propelling them forward. The gentleman turned at Lady Winthrop's approach, and Olivia had her first glimpse of her future husband. The Duke of Moreland was not at all what she had expected. Rather than the corpulent, aging nobleman she had imagined, he appeared to be in his early 30s, with strong features and keen, intelligent eyes that swept over her with frank appraisal. "Your Grace," Lady Winthrop simpered, may I present Lord Danbury and his daughter, Lady Olivia." Olivia cursed, the perfect degree of deference in her posture despite the rebellion in her heart. "Lady Olivia," the Duke said, his voice deep and measured. "I've heard much about your accomplished nature." Something in his tone suggested accomplished was not entirely complimentary. "Your Grace," she replied with careful neutrality. "How curious, as I've heard almost nothing about you." Her father stiffened beside her, but the Duke merely raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps that was by design," he suggested. "I prefer to form my own impressions rather than have them dictated by gossip. A luxury not afforded to me, it seems." "Olivia," her father warned softly. The Duke's mouth twitched. "Would you do me the honor of the first dance, Lady Olivia? I believe a waltz is beginning." Without waiting for her response, he offered his arm. Social convention left her no choice but to accept, though she took small satisfaction in the unnecessarily firm grip of her gloved fingers on his sleeve. As they took their positions, the Duke guided her with unexpected grace onto the floor. "You dance well, Your Grace," Olivia observed, determined to maintain some semblance of polite conversation. "You sound surprised." "I confess I had formed certain expectations about a man who purchases his bride through her father's debts." His hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her waist. "Is that what you believe this arrangement to be?" "Is it not?" "My father needs money. You need a duchess." The transaction seemed straightforward enough. The Duke's expression remained carefully neutral as they turned through the steps of the waltz. "Life is rarely so simple, Lady Olivia. Nor are people. Yet here we are, dancing our way toward the altar without so much as a proper acquaintance." "Then let us become acquainted," he said simply. "Tell me, do you always speak so directly?" "Only when being bartered like a prize mare at Tattersall's." A surprising sound escaped him, a low chuckle. "I was warned about your sharp tongue. And yet you persist with this match. How desperate you must be for a wife." "Perhaps," he conceded, guiding her through a turn with surprising deftness, "I find value in qualities beyond docile agreement. A radical notion in these circles, I grant you." Before Olivia could formulate a response, the music ended. The Duke bowed perfectly, his eyes never leaving hers. "A pleasure, Lady Olivia. I look forward to continuing our negotiation." With that cryptic statement, he escorted her back to her father and took his leave, leaving Olivia with the unsettling sensation that the encounter had not progressed as she had anticipated. Later that evening, as their carriage rattled homeward through London streets, her father broke the silence. "Well? What did you think of the Duke?" Olivia stared out the window. "He seems to believe he's purchasing something of value." "Olivia, he wasn't what I expected," she admitted reluctantly. "Though I still resent being sold to settle your debts." Her father sighed heavily. "The Duke approached me, not the reverse." This caught Olivia's attention. "What do you mean?" "He contacted me after meeting you briefly at Lady Jersey's musical evening last season. You probably don't recall, you were arguing with Lord Pembroke about female education." "I remember Lord Pembroke's absurd assertions that women's minds are too delicate for classical literature," Olivia said. "I don't recall the Duke's presence." "He remembered you," her father said simply. "When he heard of our difficulties, he made an offer." Olivia frowned, trying to reconcile this information with her understanding of the arrangement. "Are you suggesting the Duke harbors some romantic interest?" "That seems unlikely." "I suggest nothing. I merely relate the facts as they occurred." The following morning brought an invitation to ride in Hyde Park with the Duke. Propriety demanded a chaperone, resulting in her father's elderly cousin, Lady Millicent, joining their party with obvious delight at being included in what was clearly a courtship, however unconventional. As they rode side by side, the Duke of Moreland presented a striking figure on his magnificent black stallion. Olivia, an accomplished horsewoman, kept pace effortlessly on her mare, while Lady Millicent followed at a discreet distance on a placid gelding. "You ride well," the Duke observed. "Another surprise, Your Grace? What other accomplishments did you imagine I lacked?" "On the contrary," he replied, "I've heard extensively of your accomplishments, your facility with languages, your musical talent, your alarming habit of reading political tracts." "Alarming to whom?" "To the sort of men who fear an intelligent wife might form opinions of her own." Olivia studied him, trying to discern his true meaning. "And you, Your Grace? Do you fear a wife with opinions?" "I fear tedium far more than disagreement, Lady Olivia." They rode in silence for a moment before Olivia gathered her courage. "May I speak plainly, Your Grace? I doubt I could prevent it if I tried." She ignored his quip. "Why have you chosen me? There are dozens of younger, more biddable girls with better dowries and sweeter temperaments. Why arrange to marry a woman known for her difficult nature and whose family fortune is in ruins?" The Duke slowed his horse, turning to face her fully. "Do you truly think so little of yourself?" "I think practically," she countered. "This match makes no sense unless you're desperate for funds, which I'm told you're not, or unless you have some ulterior motive." "Perhaps," he said carefully, "I simply know what I want." "And what is that?" "A partnership, not a possession." Before she could respond, he urged his horse forward, ending the conversation as effectively as if he'd slammed a door. Over the following weeks, London buzzed with news of the impending match between the Duke of Moreland and Lady Olivia Danbury. Invitations flooded in from those eager to witness the courtship of the season, and Olivia found herself constantly in the Duke's company at dinners, musicales, and garden parties. To her growing confusion, he treated her with unfailing respect, engaging her in genuine conversation, soliciting her opinions, and occasionally, most disconcertingly, looking at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite her determination to remain unmoved. At Lord and Lady Pembroke's dinner party, Olivia found herself seated beside the Duke, with Lady Pembroke's niece, Miss Catherine Enright, on his other side. Throughout the first course, Miss Enright monopolized his attention with fluttering eyelashes and delicate compliments. "Your estate at Moreland is said to be the most beautiful in Derbyshire, Your Grace," Miss Enright cooed. "I simply adore the Peak District." "Have you visited the region, Miss Enright?" the Duke inquired politely. "Oh yes, many times. Though I've never had the privilege of seeing Moreland House itself." Olivia sipped her wine, studying the Duke over the rim of her glass. The poor man was clearly uncomfortable with Miss Enright's transparent flattery, his shoulders stiff beneath his impeccable evening coat. "Lady Olivia," he said, deliberately turning away from Miss Enright, "I was reading that political tract you recommended, Wollstonecraft's Vindication. Most illuminating." Miss Enright's eyes widened. "Political tracts, Lady Olivia? How unusual. Isn't it just?" Olivia replied sweetly. "His Grace and I were discussing the education of women just yesterday. He has quite progressive views on the subject." The Duke's mouth curved in a barely perceptible smile. "I merely suggested that denying half the population access to knowledge seems counterproductive to society's advancement." "Your Grace is too modest," Olivia continued, warming to her subject. "You specifically stated that you found nothing more tedious than a woman trained only to agree and embroider." Miss Enright looked as though she'd swallowed something unpleasant, quite possibly her embroidery needle. As the evening progressed, Olivia found herself increasingly aware of the Duke's attention, the way his eyes sought hers across the table, the slight incline of his head when she spoke. It was unsettling. Later, when the gentlemen rejoined the ladies in the drawing-room, the Duke made his way directly to Olivia's side. "You enjoyed that, didn't you?" he murmured. "Enjoyed what, Your Grace?" "Rescuing me from Miss Enright's attentions." Olivia lifted one shoulder in a delicate shrug. "I merely thought it unfair that you should suffer alone when I was available to share in the ordeal." "How generous of you," he said dryly. "I am known for my generosity of spirit." At this, the Duke laughed outright, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. "Lady Olivia, you are many admirable things, but I don't believe generous of spirit is among them." "You wound me, sir." "I doubt that very much." His eyes held hers. "You strike me as remarkably difficult to wound." Something in his tone made her pause. "And you, Your Grace? Are you easily wounded?" A shadow crossed his face. "More easily than I care to admit." Before she could pursue this unexpected vulnerability, Lady Pembroke announced that Miss Enright would favour them with a performance on the pianoforte, and the moment was lost. The following afternoon, Olivia received a small parcel delivered by the Duke's footman. Inside, she found a first edition of Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman and a note in a bold, masculine hand, "Lady Olivia. Consider this the first volume in what I hope will be our shared library. I await your thoughts on Chapter 3 with particular interest. Yours." Moreland. Olivia ran her fingers over the binding, something warm and unexpected unfurling in her chest. It was, perhaps, the most thoughtful gift she had ever received, an acknowledgment of her mind rather than merely her potential as a bride. That evening, she penned a response, "Your Grace. I find myself in the unusual position of being both surprised and grateful. The volume is exquisite, though I suspect Lady Pembroke would have an apoplexy if she knew you had gifted such dangerous material to your future Duchess. As for Chapter 3, I believe Wollstonecraft's assertion that women appear weak only because they are denied strength through education aligns rather neatly with your expressed views at dinner. Were you perhaps already familiar with the text when you claimed to be reading it on my recommendation? Most curiously yours, Lady Olivia Danbury." His reply arrived by morning messenger, "Lady Olivia. Discovered in my deception. Yes, I confess I have long admired Wollstonecraft's work, though I find her personal history as compelling as her arguments. To maintain such conviction in the face of society's censure requires remarkable courage, a quality I have observed in others of my acquaintance. As for Lady Pembroke's potential apoplexy, I cannot bring myself to consider it a deterrent. Indeed, it might be considered a fringe benefit. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me to the museum tomorrow? I have arranged a private viewing of some newly acquired antiquities. Yours in conspiracy." Moreland. The British Museum was nearly empty when they arrived the following afternoon, save for a few scholarly gentlemen bent over manuscripts and the curator who greeted the Duke with obvious deference. Lady Millicent, serving again as chaperone, settled herself comfortably on a bench near the entrance, producing embroidery from her reticule and shooing them forward with instructions not to rush on her account. "Your cousin seems unusually accommodating for a chaperone," the Duke observed as they moved through the echoing galleries. "Lady Millicent believes that at 25 I am practically on the shelf and should therefore be granted certain liberties in securing a husband." "How fortunate for me." Olivia glanced at him sideways. "You needn't worry about securing me, Your Grace. I understand my role in this arrangement." The Duke stopped walking. "Do you? I wonder. Our understanding is quite clear. You require a duchess, my father requires financial salvation. The transaction is mutually beneficial. Is that truly how you see our match? As a transaction." Something in his voice made Olivia look at him properly. His expression was unreadable, but there was tension in the set of his shoulders. "How else should I see it?" she asked, genuinely curious. "We scarcely know one another." "That is patently untrue," he countered. "I know that you prefer Wordsworth to Byron, that you speak 3 languages fluently, that you ride better than most gentlemen of my acquaintance, and that you have a regrettable tendency to argue political economy at dinner parties." Olivia blinked, startled by this catalogue of her attributes. "You've been making inquiries." "I've been paying attention," he corrected. "Just as I've noticed that you use your wit as armor, that you pretend indifference when you're actually deeply passionate about your convictions, and that despite your protests about this match, you've never once attempted to extricate yourself from it." Olivia felt suddenly exposed, as though he had peeled back her carefully constructed facade and peered directly at the vulnerabilities beneath. It was most unsettling. "Perhaps," she said, struggling to maintain her composure, "I simply understand the impossibility of defying both my father and a duke." The duke's expression softened. "Or perhaps you are not as opposed to this marriage as you claim to be." Before she could formulate a suitably cutting response, he gestured toward a glass case containing an array of ancient Greek artifacts. "I asked the curator to show us these particularly. They're from the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus." Grateful for the change of subject, Olivia moved closer to examine the artifacts. "The temple was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world," she said, recalling her studies. "Destroyed multiple times and rebuilt." "Yes." The Duke stood beside her, his voice low and intimate in the hushed gallery. "I've always found it remarkable, the human determination to rebuild what has been destroyed, often creating something more magnificent than what came before." Olivia glanced up at him, struck by the sentiment. "Are we still discussing ancient temples, Your Grace?" His eyes met hers, dark and intent. "I believe you know we are not." For the first time, Olivia allowed herself to consider the possibility that this arranged marriage might be more than a financial convenience, that the Duke of Moreland might genuinely desire her companionship, her mind, perhaps even her heart. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. As their wedding day approached, Olivia found herself caught between her long-held conviction that marriage was merely a transaction and her growing awareness that Frederick Moreland was unlike any man she had encountered. He challenged her intellectually, respected her opinions, and seemed genuinely interested in her happiness. It was most inconvenient. One afternoon, 2 weeks before the wedding, the Duke called at the Danbury townhouse with an unexpected proposal. "I thought we might visit Moreland House," he suggested as they sat in the drawing-room under Lady Millicent's distracted supervision. "It will be your home soon, after all." "Moreland House is in Derbyshire," Olivia pointed out. "That's at least 2 days' journey." 3, by comfortable stages, he corrected. "I've already spoken with your father. Lady Millicent will accompany us, of course, along with your maid. My aunt, the Dowager Duchess, will receive us. All entirely proper. You've arranged everything quite thoroughly. I find it beneficial to anticipate objections." "And what objections did you anticipate from me?" The Duke smiled slightly. "That it's too far, too presumptuous, too intimate a journey before our wedding. That you have preparations requiring your attention in London. That you prefer not to be confined in a carriage with me for 3 days." Olivia couldn't help but laugh. "You know me too well already, it seems." "Not well enough," he said softly. "Never well enough." Something in his tone made her breath catch. She looked away, flustered by the intensity of his gaze. "Very well," she said, striving for nonchalance. "I shall pack for Derbyshire." The journey to Moreland House passed more pleasantly than Olivia had anticipated. The Duke proved an engaging travelling companion, pointing out places of interest along their route and ensuring their comfort at each stop. Lady Millicent dozed frequently, providing unexpected opportunities for private conversation. During one such interlude, as their carriage rolled through the picturesque countryside of Derbyshire, Olivia gathered her courage to ask the question that had been troubling her. "Why did you never marry before now? You must have had ample opportunity." The Duke was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape. "I was engaged once, 6 years ago." This was unexpected. "What happened?" "She died," he said simply. "A fever. Very sudden." "I'm so sorry," Olivia said, genuinely moved by the pain evident in his voice. "You loved her." "I believed I did at the time." He turned to look at Olivia directly. Caroline was everything a duchess should be: gentle, accomplished, properly bred. The ton adored her. "She sounds perfect," Olivia murmured, an unexpected pang of jealousy surprising her. "Perfect, yes. And ultimately unknowable." He sighed. "After her death, I realized I had never truly known her thoughts, her dreams, her authentic self. She had been trained too well to be agreeable, to conceal any part of herself that might prove challenging. And you found that lacking." "I found it tragic," he corrected. "To think of spending a lifetime with someone who felt compelled to hide their true nature, what could be more lonely?" The carriage fell silent save for Lady Millicent's soft snoring. "Is that why you chose me?" Olivia finally asked. "Because I'm incapable of concealing my opinions." The Duke smiled, the expression transforming his austere features. "Partly. Though I prefer to think of it as appreciating your authenticity rather than merely tolerating your forthright nature." "How diplomatic of you." "I have my moments." As they approached Moreland House on the afternoon of the third day, Olivia felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. The ancestral seat of the Dukes of Moreland was renowned for its grandeur, and she wondered how she would feel seeing the estate that would soon be her responsibility as Duchess. The carriage rounded a bend in the drive, and Moreland House came into view, a magnificent Palladian mansion set amid rolling parkland, with formal gardens sweeping down to a lake that reflected the golden light of late afternoon. "Oh!" Lady Millicent exclaimed, jolting awake at the perfect moment. "How splendid!" Olivia found herself speechless, overwhelmed by the beauty and majesty of the estate. The Duke watched her reaction closely. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. "It's intimidating," she admitted. "It's home," he said simply. "Or at least, I hope it will be, for both of us." A welcoming committee had assembled on the steps, a dignified line of servants headed by a distinguished butler and a regal older woman who could only be the Dowager Duchess. As they alighted from the carriage, the Duke's aunt stepped forward, her assessing gaze sweeping over Olivia with undisguised curiosity. "Frederick, my dear," she said, offering her cheek for his kiss. "How good of you to finally bring your bride to Moreland." "Aunt Agatha," the Duke replied with evident affection. "May I present Lady Olivia Danbury and her cousin, Lady Millicent Barrow. Ladies, my aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Moreland." "Lady Olivia," the Dowager said, taking Olivia's hands in hers. "I have heard so much about you." "All dreadful, I'm sure," Olivia replied without thinking. To her surprise, the older woman laughed. "Quite the contrary. My nephew has been positively effusive in his praise, most out of character, I assure you. I began to wonder if he had fabricated your existence entirely." The Duke cleared his throat. "Perhaps we might continue this conversation inside, Aunt? Our guests are tired from the journey." "Of course," the Dowager agreed, linking her arm through Olivia's. "Come, my dear. I'll show you to your chambers myself. Frederick has had the East Wing refurbished entirely for your arrival, new furnishings, draperies, even carpets from Persia. Most extravagant. Olivia glanced at the Duke, who looked uncharacteristically discomfited. The east wing overlooks the rose garden, he explained stiffly. I thought you might prefer the morning light. How thoughtful, she murmured, touched by this evidence of his consideration. As the dowager led her through the magnificent entrance hall with its soaring ceiling and grand staircase, Olivia felt the weight of history pressing around her. Generations of Morelands gazed down from their portraits, their aristocratic features echoing those of the current Duke. Intimidating, aren't they? The dowager remarked, following her gaze. Ancient lineage is all very well, but it does make one feel rather scrutinized. I imagine they would find me wanting, Olivia said. Nonsense, the older woman replied briskly. The Morelands have always valued character above conformity, despite appearances to the contrary. Frederick's father married me despite my complete lack of fortune or connections because, as he put it, I made him laugh. The family survived the scandal admirably. Olivia looked at her with new respect. I had no idea. Few do. Society prefers to forget that the Moreland fortune was restored by trade rather than advantageous marriages. She patted Olivia's arm. Frederick is more like his father than he realizes. He values substance over superficial charm. In the days that followed, Olivia explored Moreland House and its grounds, often accompanied by the Duke himself, who proved knowledgeable about every aspect of the estate's operation. She met tenant farmers, visited the local village, and spent long hours in the magnificent library, which contained one of the finest private collections in England. To her surprise, the Duke joined her there each afternoon, sometimes reading in companionable silence, sometimes engaging her in discussions that ranged from literature to politics to estate management. You intend for me to have a real role here, she realized one day as they reviewed plans for improvements to the tenant cottages. Of course, he replied, looking surprised. You'll be the Duchess of Moreland. Your responsibilities will extend far beyond planning dinner parties and producing an heir. The blunt reference to their future marital relations brought color to Olivia's cheeks, a reaction the Duke noted with evident amusement. Have I shocked you, Lady Olivia? I thought nothing could ruffle your composure. I am not shocked, merely contemplative, she retorted. About what, precisely? His tone was light, but his eyes held a challenge. About the nature of our arrangement, she said carefully. I begin to think it may be more complex than I initially believed. Indeed? In what way? Olivia hesitated, uncertain how to express the shift in her understanding without revealing too much of her growing feelings. I had thought our marriage would be one of convenience only. That we would lead separate lives once your money had saved my family and my presence had fulfilled your need for a duchess. And now, he prompted when she fell silent. Now I wonder if you expect more. I expect nothing, he said quietly. I hope for everything. The simple statement hung between them, weighted with implications Olivia scarcely dared examine. That evening, disaster struck. The dowager had arranged a small dinner party to introduce Olivia to some of the neighbouring gentry. Among the guests was Sir Reginald Wilton, an elderly baronet whose estate bordered Moreland lands. During the soup course, Sir Reginald peered at Olivia through his quizzing glass. Danbury, you say? Any relation to Lord Danbury of the West Indies fiasco? A hush fell over the table. Olivia felt the Duke stiffen beside her. Lord Danbury is my father, she replied evenly. Thought so, Sir Reginald continued, oblivious to the tension he had created. Nasty business, that. Complete collapse of his investments, from what I hear. Creditors circling like vultures. Sir Reginald, the dowager interjected, perhaps we might discuss the weather. I understand it's been unusually fine for April. But the baronet was not to be deterred. Can't blame Moreland for stepping in, of course. Always had a good head for business, like his father before him. And getting a pretty wife in the bargain, shrewd negotiation, that. Olivia's fingers tightened around her soup spoon, her appetite vanishing. You misunderstand the situation entirely, the Duke said, his voice dangerously quiet. Do I? Sir Reginald chuckled. Come now, Moreland. Everyone knows you're bailing out the Danburys. No shame in it, been happening in our circles for generations. Pretty daughters for pretty fortunes, that's the way of it. Olivia placed her napkin beside her plate and rose. If you'll excuse me, she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the turmoil within. I find I have developed a headache. Without waiting for a response, she fled the dining room, blind to everything but her need to escape the pity and speculation in the guests' eyes. She was halfway up the grand staircase when she heard footsteps behind her. Olivia. It was the first time the Duke had used her given name. She paused but did not turn. Sir Reginald is a fool, he said, his voice tight with anger. An ill-mannered, gossiping fool who will never again be welcome in this house. But not an incorrect fool, Olivia replied, still facing away from him. He merely stated what everyone knows to be true. You are indeed saving my family from ruin through this marriage. That is not why I chose you. She turned then, looking down at him from her position on the staircase. Isn't it? You approached my father after learning of our financial difficulties. You offered marriage as the solution. These are facts, Your Grace. Frederick, he corrected. And yes, those are facts, but not the complete truth. Then what is the truth? She demanded, her composure finally cracking. Why choose a bride with no fortune, no particularly remarkable beauty, and a reputation for being difficult? What possible advantage could such a match bring you? The Duke, Frederick, he climbed the stairs until he stood just below her, their faces nearly level. Advantage, he echoed. Is that truly how you see yourself? As a liability rather than an asset? I am being practical. No, he said firmly. You are being blind. Willfully, stubbornly blind to what has been before you these past weeks. And what is that? My admiration. My respect. My growing affection. He raked a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. Good God, Olivia, I have reorganized my library, refurbished an entire wing of this house, and endured your cousin's endless discourse on the medicinal properties of valerian root, all to make you comfortable here. I have discussed estate management, agricultural improvements, and political reform with you as I would with any trusted advisor. Does this truly strike you as the behavior of a man merely fulfilling a financial arrangement? Olivia stared at him, her certainty wavering. I don't understand. Clearly, he agreed, his voice softening. Let me be plain, then. I saw you at Lady Jersey's musical evening, arguing passionately about female education with a roomful of scandalized aristocrats. You were magnificent, intelligent, fearless, utterly yourself despite society's disapproval. You noticed me because I was making a spectacle of myself. I noticed you because you were the only genuine person in a room full of carefully constructed facades. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. When I later heard of your father's difficulties, I saw an opportunity to approach him with an offer he couldn't refuse. It was calculating, perhaps even manipulative, but I knew no other way to secure an introduction that might lead to marriage. Olivia's mind reeled. You wanted to marry me before you even knew me. I wanted the chance to know you, he corrected. To discover if the woman I glimpsed that evening was as remarkable as she appeared. She is, by the way. More so, in fact. The warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. This is most unexpected. Is it? He smiled slightly. I thought I had been embarrassingly transparent in my admiration. I believed you were merely being kind. I am never merely kind, Olivia. I am practical, strategic, and occasionally generous, but kindness for its own sake is not in my nature. She couldn't help but laugh at his frank self-assessment. So you manipulated my father's financial ruin to secure my hand in marriage. When you put it that way, I sound rather villainous. He grimaced. I preferred to think of it as solving two problems simultaneously. And if I had refused, I would have assisted your father regardless, he said simply. But I would have been gravely disappointed. Olivia studied him, seeing beyond the ducal facade to the man beneath, complex, intelligent, and surprisingly vulnerable in this moment of honesty. I should return to our guests, he said after a moment. Unless you would like me to make your excuses and end the evening early. No, she decided. I believe I've recovered from my headache. We should go back together. His expression brightened. Together, then. As they descended the stairs, his hand warm and steady beneath hers, Olivia felt something shift within her, a relaxing of the armor she had worn for so long, a willingness to consider possibilities beyond her cynical expectations. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, with spring sunshine filtering through the windows of Olivia's bedchamber in the London townhouse. They had returned to the city a week earlier to finalize preparations for the ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square, where the cream of society would gather to witness the union of the Duke of Moreland and Lady Olivia Danbury. As Jenkins arranged her hair beneath the priceless lace veil that had belonged to the Duke's mother, Olivia contemplated the journey that had brought her to this day. From initial resentment to grudging respect to something much more complex and profound, her feelings for Frederick Moreland had evolved in ways she could never have anticipated. A knock at the door heralded her father's arrival. Lord Danbury entered, resplendent in formal attire, his expression a mixture of pride and barely suppressed emotion. "You look beautiful, my dear," he said, kissing her cheek. "Your mother would have been so proud." Olivia squeezed his hand, her throat tight. "Are you disappointed that I'm not making a love match, Papa?" Her father looked surprised. "Is that what you believe? That this is merely a marriage of convenience? Isn't it? The Duke's fortune saves our family, I become a duchess. A transaction, as I've always maintained." Lord Danbury studied her with unexpected insight. "Perhaps that was true at the beginning. I'm not certain it remained so." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have observed the Duke of Moreland these past weeks, my dear. I have seen how he looks at you when you're engaged in debate, how he listens to your opinions with genuine interest, how he anticipates your needs before you express them." He smiled gently. "These are not the actions of a man fulfilling a business arrangement." "He has been kind," Olivia acknowledged. "He has been in love," her father corrected. "And unless I am very much mistaken, his feelings are not entirely unrequited." Olivia felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Papa!" "Am I wrong?" he challenged gently. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet his knowing gaze. "I admire him greatly." As one admires a fine painting or a well-crafted sonnet, her father teased. As one admires a man of intelligence, principle, and unexpected sensitivity, she corrected, a smile tugging at her lips despite her embarrassment. "My dear," Lord Danbury said, taking her hands in his, "you have spent your life believing that marriage must be either a love match or a practical arrangement. Perhaps it can be both." The simple observation struck Olivia with the force of revelation. Could it be true? Could she have stumbled, despite her cynicism and resistance, into a marriage that satisfied both practical necessity and emotional fulfillment. St. George's was filled to capacity, the assembled ton buzzing with anticipation as Olivia processed down the aisle on her father's arm. At the altar stood Frederick, his tall figure commanding in formal attire, his expression solemn until he turned and saw her approaching. Then, just for a moment, his public mask slipped, and she glimpsed such naked adoration in his eyes that her steps faltered. He loved her. Not as a convenient solution to his need for a duchess, not as an interesting conversationalist or an appropriate social partner, but as a woman with all her sharp edges, strong opinions, and hidden vulnerabilities. And in that moment of clarity, Olivia acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding: she loved him too. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a sense of rightness, as though pieces of a puzzle had finally aligned. As Lord Danbury placed her hand in Frederick's, she felt the slight tremor in his fingers and realized that beneath his ducal composure, he was as moved by the moment as she was. "You are beautiful," he whispered, so softly that only she could hear. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient vows and solemn promises. When the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, Frederick's kiss was brief and proper, mindful of their audience, but the promise in his eyes made Olivia's heart race with anticipation. Later, after the wedding breakfast and the interminable receiving line of well-wishers, they departed for Moreland House in a carriage bedecked with flowers, finally alone save for Frederick's valet and Olivia's maid, who rode discreetly in a second carriage behind them. "Well, Your Grace," Frederick said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "how does it feel to be a duchess?" "Remarkably similar to being a baron's daughter," she replied, though the curtsy seemed to be deeper. He laughed, the sound warm in the intimate space of the carriage. "And how does it feel to be my wife?" The question was lighter in tone but weighted with meaning that made Olivia's pulse quicken. "That," she said carefully, "remains to be fully determined." "Indeed?" He raised an eyebrow. "Are there aspects of the role you find unclear?" "Several." She smoothed her skirts, gathering her courage. "For instance, I am uncertain whether you expect your duchess to be primarily decorative or functional." "Primarily functional," he replied promptly. "Though I confess I find you extremely decorative as well." A blush warmed her cheeks. "And do you expect your wife to maintain separate apartments, as is customary in many aristocratic marriages?" "Only if she wishes it," he said, his voice softening. "My preference would be for greater proximity." "I see." Olivia took a deep breath. "And what of affection? What role does that play in your expectations for this marriage?" Frederick's expression grew serious. He reached across the carriage to take her hand. "Affection," he echoed. "Is that what you believe I feel for you, Olivia?" She faltered, suddenly uncertain. That is, I thought perhaps I am in love with you," he said simply. "Deeply, completely in love. I have been since that first evening at Lady Jersey's, when you demolished Lord Pembroke's arguments with such precision and passion. Every moment since has only confirmed what I knew then, that you are the only woman I could ever wish to make my duchess, my partner, my wife." Olivia stared at him, her carefully prepared speech forgotten in the face of his direct declaration. "Oh." His mouth quirked. "An unusually succinct response from you. I find myself temporarily without words. A historic moment, indeed." His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "Perhaps I might suggest some?" She nodded, unable to look away from the intensity of his gaze. "You might say, Frederick, what a remarkable coincidence, for I find myself similarly affected. Or perhaps, Your Grace, your sentiments are returned in full measure." "Or even, I love you," she interrupted, the words bursting forth with all the conviction of a newly discovered truth. I love you, and I cannot precisely say when it happened, which is most vexing as I generally pride myself on careful observation. His smile was radiant. When doesn't matter. That it happened at all is miracle enough. He shifted to sit beside her, drawing her into his arms with a tenderness that made her throat tight with emotion. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the chaste peck in the church. This was a lover's kiss, deep and passionate and full of promise. I believe, he murmured against her lips, that this marriage of convenience may prove far more inconvenient and infinitely more satisfying than either of us anticipated. Olivia laughed, joy bubbling up within her. How fortunate that we both excel at adapting to unexpected circumstances. Indeed, he agreed, pulling her closer. Though in this case, I believe the circumstances have adapted to us, rather than the reverse. As the carriage rolled onward toward Moreland House and their future together, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from reluctant bride soul to settle her father's debts to beloved wife, cherished for exactly who she was, with all her opinions and intelligence intact. "What are you thinking?" Frederick asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That I have never been so glad to be wrong," she admitted. "I believed marriage was merely a transaction, a necessary compromise between duty and desire. And now?" She looked up at him, this man who had upended all her cynical certainties and offered something far more precious in their place. "Now I believe it can be a partnership of equals, founded on mutual respect and genuine affection." She smiled, tracing the strong line of his jaw with her fingertips. "Though I reserve the right to disagree with you frequently and vociferously on matters of importance." "I would expect nothing less," he assured her, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "In fact, I rather look forward to it." "As do I, Your Grace," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "As do I,"